I'd like to invite you to turn your Bibles to Mark chapter 1, verses 39 to 45. And you were answering this question as we walk through the book of Mark. Who is this man, Jesus? I mean, Mark has proposed, and throughout his book, he proves that Jesus was, in fact, the incarnation of God. Jesus was the Son of God. So if God were to come to earth, what would he be like? So who is this man? The question about Jesus would be, is there anybody outside of your compassion and your love? Does anyone so disgust you, Jesus, that you just don't care or you won't help? And that's the story of this man that we're going to look at today, because it's going to be the story of the leper who comes to Jesus. But I wonder if you've ever been in a place where you just feel desperate, hopeless, confused, wondering if God is done with you, wondering if God could help you in that difficult situation. What will be your answer? Well, when I was 5 years old, and for those of you who have been around for a while, you know this story. When I was 5 years old, my family was living in Springfield, Missouri. We actually lived in an old house that still is standing at the corner of Dale and National. It was next to the liquor store. It's been an ammo store. It's now, I think, a church. I'm not sure what it is. But I drive by that house, and, I have memories that come to me. And I do remember when I was 5 years old, and I was very young. I had a couple younger siblings that mumps started going around, and I got sick with the mumps. And what I remember about having mumps was that there was a big fever, and then I felt this pain behind my ears. And then pretty much that's all I remembered. Now, I later learned that the quiet times of that experience were pretty dramatic for my mom and my dad. You see, because the mumps for me went into encephalitis, which is a swelling of the brain, and my mom took me to the hospital. I was at Cox, we call it Cox North now. That used to be the only Cox. And the doctors told my mom that she needed, after several days of me being unresponsive in the hospital because of this terrible fever, they told my mom, you need to be prepared because we're not sure if this little boy of yours is going to survive. They came back a couple more days later and said, now, if he does survive, you need to be prepared for what kind of disability he will have. And back in that day, they used clumsy words to describe things. They even told her, he may be a vegetable. I hope I wasn't an asparagus. But anyway, but they were warning her, everything could change. And there's really not much we can do. But I had this mother, like many mothers, who would never stop fighting for me. My mom didn't care how hopeless and desperate the doctors made the situation sound. My mom got on her knees and prayed. And she prayed prayers of faith, believing that God could do the impossible. Isn't that incredible? And I remember she called her friends and everybody she knew, and she got them to pray. And she called my dad, he had just become a missionary. He was traveling. He was somewhere, I think in Texas or somewhere. And she told my dad how sick I was. And he began to get people to pray. And then when I took a turn for the worse, she called my dad and told him he needed to come back. And he came back, and that's where, everybody just kind of was with breath held, don't know where this is going. And she prayed, and she believed that just maybe God would intervene and I would survive. Now, I'm a parent now, okay? So I know what it's like to wear the weight of concern for a sick child and for begging God to please come and help because the doctors don't have anything they think they can do. And the good news is, you may have guessed it, I didn't die. I do remember after several days in the hospital, I woke up and I looked around and I told my mom I wanted to go home and play. I don't want to be in this hospital. I was finally dismissed from the hospital. I didn't realize what an answer to prayer I was experiencing. But I was dismissed from the hospital and we drove back to that little house on Dale and National. And I walked from the car to the front door and then I collapsed because my legs, they just went numb. I couldn't move them. My dad scooped me up at the threshold of the door, put me on the couch, and another phone call was made to the doctors, and the doctor's response was, this sometimes happens after that long of a severe fever. It may be temporary, it could be permanent, we don't know what's going to happen. And they said the only thing you could do is put him in hot baths, and maybe that would wake up the nerves and bring things back. And so I remember in those days, I was young enough to not panic. And I remember my dad carrying me to a hot bath several times a day. It was so hot. And this last year, just before my dad died, as I was taking him back and forth to the doctors, we drove by that house, and I said to my dad, Dad, there's the house we used to live in. Do you have any thoughts about your time in that house? He said, I remember, Eddie, looking outside, and I was surprised because you were running around the front yard. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, after you were sick and we didn't know if you'd ever walk again, your mom would put you in the grass and scatter toys around you, hoping to motivate you to get up. And I'll never forget the day I looked out and you were standing and running around after your toys. And God answered our prayers. You know what? It's so amazing that we have a God who is that attentive. Now, this doesn't mean that God answers every prayer the way we want. But it certainly does inspire us to believe that if there is something we need, we might ask, we should ask in faith, believing. And I think that this story is about people that are desperate and hopeless. And no matter how difficult things are for you right now, you are not beyond the compassion of Jesus. Do you believe that? He cares about you. He knows you. He was here to help you. He will step in. You just got to ask. And so this is the story of the leper in Mark chapter 1, beginning in verse 39. And it goes like this. And he, Jesus, was preaching in their synagogues throughout all Galilee and casting out demons. Now a leper came to him, imploring him, kneeling down to him and saying to him, if you are willing, you can make me clean. So this man's life is so defined by this term. He was a leper. Leprosy was not just a disease that affected the body and your health. It comprehensively changed every part of an individual's life. There was physical pain and suffering, watching your body develop sores and the infection spreading from limb to limb, losing sensation and the ability to use your hands and your feet and all other parts of the body as you watch as the disease progressed. It was a slow, terrible way to die. There was not only physical pain, but this disease was so contagious that a person that had leprosy was immediately sent out of their home, away from their family, and told they had to live outside in the wilderness, and the only other people that could ever be around were other lepers. There was no tender compassion given by a husband or a wife or children. I mean, you were gone. You had to leave. Your social world changed. They could never be touched. Even those who loved them, they couldn't kiss them or hold their hand. A leper could never assemble together again to worship with other people. So they felt so distant from the worship of God. Emotionally, this disease took a toll because their illness progressed. And as it progressed, their emotional state became more desperate. It affected them financially because the leper could no longer work. You can't be around people, so you can't work, and nobody wants to get anything that you've touched. And so a leper was sick, rejected, unable to work. He would be a lonely beggar until the day that he died, all alone, and then he would be thrown into the trash. Furthermore, leprosy had this stigma attached to it that maybe you had committed some kind of terrible, terrible sin. You were a sinner at the next level. Now, that wasn't necessarily true, but that was the stigma that was attached to people who had leprosy. I don't even know if anybody ever prayed for lepers to be healed because it was too far gone. It was devastating physically, socially, emotionally, financially, and spiritually. Now, we've seen Jesus in Mark chapter 1, and it's sort of like broad stroke descriptions of the diseased and the sick came to him and he healed them. So we don't get specifics. It's like the group that was sick came and Jesus healed the group. And then all of a sudden, we have this particular story of a man who has a disease, and it is leprosy, and he comes to Jesus. And I ask myself the question, why? Why do we single out this one guy among all of the people that were diseased and tell his story? And I think the reason is because Jesus wants to declare that the most hopeless and desperate among us we're still not beyond the compassion and the love of Jesus. I think that's what he's trying to say to us. Do you ever feel like God is done with you? You ever feel like that you don't really have a future anymore? You plaster on a smile, but deep within your soul, your woundedness is so deep, you don't even know if God will listen to you. This man had been struggling at the hardest level. And the social rules and regulations that surrounded someone with leprosy made it impossible for him to join the crowd of the sick people that Jesus healed. He couldn't even go with them. I mean, he was not fun to be around. His disease had made him unsightly because of the wounds, the infections, the open sores, and they made him stink. And he knew that if he even tried to approach Jesus, he would be intercepted. I mean, there was no way he could approach this celebrity rabbi without people objecting. And if he actually got close enough to Jesus to make a request, it was likely that these people around him would pick up sticks and beat this man with a stick. They didn't dare touch him, but they would beat him to send him away or maybe even beat him to death because of the audacity of his approach. This man, however, decides, I'm going to try. I'm going to try. You know, I have a son named James who has Down syndrome, and one of the things I love most is he wants to go to the Dollar General every single day of his life. I mean, every single day of his life. The request will come every day. It came already today. And sometimes I'll tell him, no, James, we're not going. Nope, we're not. And the closer we get to the house, James starts a new routine to convince me, and he says, Dad, just try. Just try. James, I said, no, we're not going to the Dollar General today. We can't go to the Dollar General every single day. But Dad, just try. And do you know what I usually do? I try. This man is so desperate. He says, I'm going to give this my last shot. If they beat me to death, so be it. I'm dying anyway. he comes to Jesus and he implores him, kneeling down to him. This is in verse 40, and saying, if you're willing, you can make me clean. Now notice he doesn't demand a healing. He doesn't act like he is owed a healing. He just makes a request. He casts himself on the grace and the mercy of God. In this request, he's implying, you don't really owe me anything, Jesus. I know this is a very difficult request. It's in your hands whether you decide to let me be cleansed or not. He doesn't try to make a deal with Jesus. Have you ever tried to make a deal with God? You know, like when you've messed up yet one more time, it's the same thing that you've done before, that you've asked for forgiveness, and now you're guilty for what you've done now, plus you have all of these preceding incidences, and you go to God and you're like, man, I don't even know if he's going to listen to me this time, so I'm going to come with a bargain, and I'm going to say, have you prayed this? I prayed this. God, if you will just forgive me this time, I promise I'll never do it again. Which, by the way, I don't recommend that prayer because you don't have the power to promise that. This man makes no promise. This man makes no boast. This man just comes to God and throws himself at the mercy and the goodness of God, believing that God has come in the person of Jesus and he has power. And maybe, just maybe, before they kill him, Jesus might listen. You know, Jesus, throughout the New Testament and other passages in the Gospels, talks about how, you know, God is easily entreated. Luke 18 is one of my favorite stories where Jesus is telling a parable, and he's directing this parable to those who trust in themselves, okay? Those are the bargainers with God. And he describes two men that go. One is a Pharisee, one's a tax collector. The Pharisee goes, he prays, God, I'm so glad I'm not like that guy. God, I fast twice a week. I give my tithes. I'm here again. And so this man is boasting about all the things he does to try to be right with God. And then in verse 13 of Luke 18, and the tax collector, standing afar off, would not so much as raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast. Man, look at the detail of this. He wouldn't even look up to God. Why? He's so undeserving. He beats his breast. He just bows before God in an act of humility. And this is his prayer. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. No bargain, no boast, just begging. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. If you are willing, this leper says to Jesus, you can make me clean. I don't know if you're willing. You don't have to be willing. I got nothing but to ask. So if you can just imagine, this leper is kind of like at the feet of Jesus, kind of balled up, as small as he can get. If you're willing, you can make me clean. And then it's silent. Have you ever had a time when you've asked a question and it's silent and you don't know where it's going to go? And in the silence, I don't know what this guy is thinking. Maybe he's thinking, what was I thinking, trying to come to Jesus? Why would Jesus pay attention to me? Man, I'm expecting the beatings to start. They probably would some way drive me out. They may, okay, I don't know what's going to happen here. And Jesus is silent, so maybe it's true that he doesn't care and he won't help. And And then the silence is interrupted. Jesus, verse 41, moved with compassion, stretched out his hand and touched him and said, I am willing, be cleansed. And as soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. Now, one of the things that lepers lose is the ability to feel touch in the affected areas. But all of a sudden, in the silence, this leper felt the touch of Jesus. And then he heard the words, I am willing, be cleansed. Timothy Keller writes about this passage, and he says that if this had been a Greek or Roman leper, they would have most likely asked to be healed. But he was a Hebrew leper, and he knew he needed more than just for the leprosy to go away. He was physically wounded, but he was also socially hurt, emotionally damaged by his experience. He also admits that he needs to be cleansed. It implies the washing of sin. That's what the washing of sin. So when he asks to be cleansing, he's asking for it all. You know, today, many of us, maybe you're here today, carry wounds deep within your soul. And you look good, and you act pretty good, but the woundedness of your soul is profound. I hear stories from people that tell me that they grew up in, violent, abusive homes. I've heard people tell me, I don't even know what it's like to have a mother who loved me. My mother didn't love or nurture me. Nobody ever celebrated me. I never got a birthday present or home was just really painful. And the wound has made them numb and they hurt so much. And the question is, does Jesus care about those hidden wounds of our souls? And the answer that comes through this story is yes, he does. And sometimes we ask for too little. I just want to feel better. And Jesus would say, I've got a lot more than that. I want to cleanse you and make you well. I love you. I value you so much. I went to a cross to pay for your sin, the sins you have committed. I will heal you from the wounds that were an affliction that you brought on yourself. I will heal you from the wounds that were done to you, the abuse committed against you. With his stripes, we are healed. This is the comprehensive salvation that comes through Jesus. And Jesus spoke things like this. Matthew 11:28-29. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And no one is beyond the compassion of Jesus. Secondly, it's important to ask, as this leper did. He went to Jesus and he asked, what's the thing you need today? What's the thing you wonder might be beyond God's compassion and care and ability to change in you? You should ask. Hopelessness and despair is broken by the power of the ask. For with God, nothing shall be impossible. Jesus actually told a parable, man, not always to pray and not to lose heart. It's in Luke chapter 18. It's the widow that went to an unjust judge and asked for help. He wouldn't help her. It's a parable of contrast. And he says, if the unjust judge, because of her persistent asking day after day after day after day, said, I'm going to help her so she'll go away, how much more the Father in heaven, who loves you and cares about you and delights to give good things to his children, will he not give you when you ask? And the answer is yes. We should be as bold as the leper who ran to him in the hardest of times and asked for help. Now, today is the first of the month, and so we will spend time in extended prayer after we take communion. And here's the challenge. Today, we are challenged to ask again. But I've asked God before and nothing's happened. Yeah, I get it. Does it still hurt? Is it still a concern? Is it still something you think about? Ask again. Jesus tells this parable. At the end of this, he says, and shall not God avenge his own elect who cry out day and night to him? Though he bears long with them, I tell you that he will avenge them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, here's the question, will he really find faith in the earth? Will you still be asking at the end of time? We should all die with our prayer lists full. Because every day of our life, we become aware of new needs and have new concerns for people we love. God wants us to be bold like the leper and ask. You know, there's this amazing thing about prayer that we read about in Revelation chapter 8. And it's that when you pray, you know, we think that I'm going to pray today, and it's kind of like winning the lottery. Is it going to work today or not? Okay. Someone told me that some lottery, I'm not real up on this, but I heard it on the news. Some lottery was, at least when I heard the news a few days ago, was worth $1.6 billion. Does anybody know about that? Yeah, okay. There we go. I got some honest people in this room. I had someone who told me, I don't ever play the lottery, but I sure am tempted. $1.6 billion, that's a lot of money. Has somebody won that yet? Do you know? No, okay. I'm not trying to advertise. But we think of praying as like, maybe I'll win the lottery. Maybe today's the day he's going to say yes. But really, in Revelation chapter 8, you know what it says? It says, actually, our prayers that we pray, even those who seem to be going unanswered, are stored up in heaven. The imagery of Revelation chapter 8 is just astounding, that God stores the prayers of the saints. Every time you pray, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. May your kingdom come and your will be done. And then we see nothing happens. But did you know that you're not playing the lottery? You are putting prayers into the account. And in Revelation chapter 8, these prayers are collected and stored. So if you can imagine, millions of saints over time have been praying up prayers, asking for God's will to be done. And there are millions and billions of prayers of the saints that are being collected and stored. And one day, the imagery in Revelation chapter 8 is mixed with incense. The prayers of the saints will be poured out on the earth. And when that happens, there will be peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. And what that means is your prayers are being collected and will be, in fact, poured out because they matter. Don't ever stop praying. Don't ever stop. Mark Batterson writes an article that is all about the phrase one day, and this is what he has to say. Acts 10:3, there's a phrase, it is one day. He says, one day, it is pregnant with hope. Why? Because one day could be today. Today could be the day that God answers the prayer, performs the miracle, or keeps the promise. In one day, God can deliver an addiction from an addiction that has held a person captive for years. In one day, God can bring a prodigal child who has run away and been gone for decades. In one day, God can provide more than someone has accumulated in a lifetime. But if we are going to experience a miracle one day, we need to pray every day. Too many people pray like they are playing the lottery. Prayer is more like an investment account. Every deposit accumulates compound interest, and one day, if we keep making deposits every day, it will pay in dividends beyond our wildest imaginations, because you see, God is going to win. Lastly, love always comes with a price. Jesus was moved with compassion on this leper, and he touched him and said, I am willing, be cleansed. And then in verse 43, he strictly warned him and sent him away at once and said, strictly warned him. You hear the intensity. Listen, buddy, it's a good day for you. Well, I'm strictly warning you right now. See that you say nothing to anyone, but go your way, show yourself to the priest, and offer your cleansing, those things which Moses commanded as a testimony to them. So the idea was, if you were a leper, you had to go to the priest. They were sort of like the public health officer. They would examine the wound to decide whether or not you in fact were clean. And if they declared you clean, you could resume your normal life. But they were going to evaluate whether or not a known leper was in fact ready to re-enter society. But this guy, after hearing this warning, what does he do? I don't know if he was just so excited he couldn't stand it. Maybe he just wasn't careful to obey the instruction of Jesus. However, it says he went out and began to proclaim it freely and to spread the matter, so that Jesus could no longer openly enter the city, but was outside in deserted places, and they came to him from every direction. And so what happens is, because of this man's disobedience, it was now pointed out for public understanding that Jesus had in fact touched a leper. And there were rules about touching lepers. If you touched a leper, you were now considered unclean. You had to be sequestered and quarantined. We know a little bit about that, don't we, post-COVID? You had to be quarantined for a certain amount of days. You'd have to go back to the priest and offer appropriate sacrifices. He would examine you to make sure that you did not get infected by the leper. And so when this man did not obey Jesus, he actually interrupted what Jesus had planned to do. He could no longer preach in the cities because he was seen to be unclean. He had to stay out in the wilderness. At the end of the story, the leper who only lived in the wilderness and Jesus traded places. Now, Jesus is out in the wilderness, and the leper is back with the people because of his disobedience. And, I wonder if Jesus said, oh, that leper, why did I heal him? No, he didn't say that. Jesus was God. He knew what was going to happen. He fully anticipated that people that he loved would disappoint him, and he was willing. You know what? This kind of sacrificial love is what Jesus had for people. In the Bible, we called it agape love. Did you know that love, by its definition, the real love, is a love that always pays? You can't love someone without it costing you. Did you know that? You marry a wife, you marry a husband, you have children. All of these people that you love, they will cost you. They'll cost you money, they'll cost you everything. But that's what love is. Agape love is unconditional love that agrees to pay and serve and give and forgive. You know what the truth about love is? That if you love someone, they hurt you, it's so painful, but you will forgive them, and you will absorb the offense and then still love them. That's what true forgiveness is. Jesus says, it's okay. I'll continue my ministry in the wilderness. And people came. Love is the most wonderful thing in life. Dr. Carl Menninger, a psychiatrist and founder of his own clinic, said this: love is the medicine for our sick old world. If people can learn to give and receive love, they will usually recover from the physical or mental illness. Now, this is the subject of many prayers. All we need is love, 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 okay? Sometimes I get sick from those lyrics because love, love, love. He goes on, this is the kind of love that we kind of think about. The problem, however, is that few people have an idea of what true love is. Most people, including many Christians, seem to think of it only in terms of nice feelings, warm affection, romance, and desire. When we say, I love you, we often mean, I love me and I want you. That, of course, is the worst sort of selfishness, the very opposite of the kind of love described in Scripture. I love you. So when you hurt me, I'll forgive you. I won't make you pay. I won't seek revenge. The truth is that God has this level of love for us. This leper proves that God's compassion will always be extended, even our worst of times. In Isaiah 53, it says, this is the plan of Jesus. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. So take heart today. If you will humble yourself before God and ask, his compassion can be extended to you. You just got to ask.